You are listening to Off the Shelf, a podcast by The Conference Board.
Hello, my name is Robin Erickson, and I'm a principal researcher in the Human Capital Center at the Conference Board. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, a podcast series brought to you by the Conference Board. According to the Center for Disease Control's National Center for Health Statistics, in 2019, 8% of Americans had anxiety disorders. Today, over 40% of Americans, or over 120 million people, have been diagnosed with anxiety or depression disorders, and that number doesn't include those of us who may be undiagnosed. Anxiety causes us to be hijacked by our emotions and impairs our ability to perceive our surroundings and to think and act effectively. The solution to this rising anxiety pandemic is to develop our resilience. Joining me today is Dr. Leo Flanagan. He wears many titles: my friend, my co-presenter, my co-author, and Distinguished Principal Research Fellow here at the Conference Board. He's the founder and president of the Center for Resilience, and now a book author of Thriving in Thin Air, Developing Resilience in Challenging Times. Thriving in Thin Air applies the latest neuroscience to enable readers to rewire their brains so that they can thrive even in difficult and challenging times. Thanks so much for joining us today, Leo.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be with you.
So, Leo, why is the topic of resiliency so important to you?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is I've wanted to be a psychologist since I was 15 years old. And when you finally get to graduate school, you have this idea that you're going to help people and cure people and fix people. And 2 weeks into my first semester of graduate school, my mentor, Professor Morton Bard, who is just an amazing individual and also a clinician, he said, Leo, it is not so interesting that people have difficulties in life and challenges and need help. He said, what's really interesting is there are lots of people that have those same challenges and difficulties, and they do just fine. And that really just changed my entire worldview. And then I had the good fortune of Professor Suzanne Willett-Cabeza, who did the seminal research on what was then called hardiness. And she became my dissertation sponsor. And, it just really changed the way I viewed the world. And then in the last few years, it's become really clear to me that mental health is such a challenge, well before the pandemic, globally, that we need a public health solution. The old model that I was trained in and still use of one-on-one, one-on couples, one-on families is just not scalable. So resilience is something that is more positive. It doesn't assume there's anything broken with you. It doesn't assume that there's anything that can't be developed. And, so it's very hopeful and it's scalable. And so for those reasons, it's just been a real passion of mine for over 35 years.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. So tell us how you define resilience in the book and then some of the benefits of developing resiliency.
Great. So resilience is thriving amidst adversity, thriving. Even in this environment, people who build their resilience end up thriving. It's not about stress management. It's not about coping. It's not about surviving. It's about thriving, even in this circumstance. And the benefits, because it's a multi-factor model, means lots of parts, there's lots of benefits. So people who develop the resilience have about a 30% improvement in how they feel physically and how they feel emotionally. So that's just huge. But they also get a 20% improvement in productivity. So, lots and lots of people have just been working around the clock during this pandemic. And as we move out of it, that's going to continue. There's so much to be done. So imagine having 20% more productivity. So maybe you get a Sunday off and half a day Saturday. Maybe you can work, 9 hours and not 12. Huge benefits. Also, you get a 60% increase in your error rate when you are anxious or burned out. That goes away when you build your resilience. So there's lots of benefits. Those are just a few.
Hey, and I think those benefits, though, are things that we all would like. So thank you for that.
Sure.
When it comes to the book, I've never seen this done before, but I love that chapter 1 starts out, if you are highly stressed or overwhelmed and want to immediately get started feeling better, go to chapter 4. Then after 5 days, go to chapter 6. Tell us why you started the book that way.
Well, one of my areas of expertise is trauma. And when people have been traumatized, and almost all of us have been in this era to some level or another, and then there are people who, have huge traumas, they need to feel better fast. And so, why it works, why I'm writing the book now, that's of interest to Leo, the author. But if I'm in pain, which so many people are, get me to relief. And so I give people that choice of, I get it. If you just want to, feel better, forget all this background stuff and forget, the science. You can always come back and read that. But right now, if you go to these chapters in that order, you will feel better pretty quickly. And it's just about, triage and kind of emergency emotional first aid, if you will.
I love that idea. And I love that the book did that. So then, earlier I mentioned that the book deals with neuroscience, and at a high level, because most of us have forgotten most of our high school and college science, tell us about some of the neuroscience that underlies the rewiring of our brains to be resilient.
Well, this is probably not true for you, but it is true for people of, let's say, my vintage. That the good news is I did forget most of my high school and college science, because when it comes to neuroscience, it was wrong. So, we used to believe that, the brain developed till you were 5 years of age and your personality was formed and you were done. And we were totally wrong. So the basic amazing thing we found out was that the brain continues to change as long as you're reasonably healthy. So, in the very tragic cases where people have Alzheimer's or dementia or, other kinds of injury to the brain, this growth can be compromised. But generally speaking, throughout your life, your brain rewires. And it rewires based upon a very simple principle, which we were also wrong about. We used to believe that, if you went on a diet for 30 days, you lost weight and it worked. If you worked out for 30 days, if you did anything for 30 days, wasn't wonderful. Total nonsense. At the end of 30 days of doing something, you feel like it's working and you feel good. But you need to go to 70 days before it's really wired into your brain. That's a huge difference. But the principle is anything that you experience consistently for 70 days will rewire your brain to make that the automatic response. So I'm somebody who, by pounds has lost myself probably 5 or 6 times, 20 pounds at a time, and then gained it back until I understood this science. But if you get to 70 days, you really have enduring change. So to bring it back to, and that's there's lots of neuroscience going on. The other piece is, we've got the amygdala and the limbic system. And so one thing I want people to understand is your anxiety is the result of your brain working properly. Your brain, the amygdala in particular, is designed that in the face of any threat, you're mobilized to take flight or to fight. And we have been under constant threat from multiple directions for over 500 days, depending on when you first came to be aware of COVID. And so that is really hardwired. But the really, really good news is if you go read those chapters and you practice those behaviors consistently for 70 days, you will rewire your brain once again and return to a resilient state. So the prefrontal cortex is what we focus on because we can actually make it strong enough, as if we're programming a computer, that it calms down the amygdala. You don't want the amygdala to stop because there are real threats in life, but you don't want this constant activation. So we kind of power up the prefrontal cortex, that tempers the amygdala, and you become calm, confident, and effective in all areas of your life.
So you mean living like an adrenaline junkie isn't really the way we should be living?
No.
I laugh because I am guilty of that.
You're not alone, and, in many societies, particularly the US, I think, but also Japan and other places, heroic working is honored and the source of legends. Forget when you're in pandemic, just when you're, in a more calm world, if you will. We make heroes of people who literally kill themselves. The World Health Organization just issued a report that there's 765,000 deaths a year from overwork. So another reason why, we build our resilience and we can avoid that, temper that down.
Well, and just to add, we recently here at the conference board did some research that shows that employee well-being has been deteriorating since the beginning of the pandemic.
Absolutely.
More than 70% of the organizations who responded saying that burnout had increased. So anyway, thank you for that. So
Sure.
let's talk about some more of the answers. The book follows your 10-part N resilience model. How did you develop the model? And then what are the 10 sets of behavior that are essential to providing relief from anxiety, and particularly those where people could get started?
Yeah, so I didn't start out to build a 10-part model because it's too complicated, but you got to follow the science. That's the whole difference in what we're doing here. So you start with the definition of resilience, ability to thrive in the midst of adversity. And then you just start doing an analysis of all the research out there, and there's an incredible amount that provides that capability. And I won't go through all the, kind of academic researchy processes, but you go through a meta-analysis and you pare it down till you've got these really, really solid factors that contribute to thriving amidst adversity. And one of the criteria was any factor included had to be backed up by neuroscience. So not just survey research and things like that, which all have their place, right? But the idea is we want everybody that we teach, everybody that reads the book, to understand that this is based on hard neuroscience. It's not like, the old days, where as a clinician, you could think about it as a psychologist having a black bag. And in the black bag are all these evidence-based techniques. And I see somebody and I think, this might work. And I say, try this. But the word might is there. Right? So then they come back and I make an adjustment. Resilience is not that. If you practice focus, your brain will be wired so that you will be focused. Okay, so what's in that package? Well, some of it is mindfulness, which is very topical these days, and that's about being able to meditate. Ideally, you meditate once a day for 20 minutes because that does the real wiring, and then a couple of times a day you do a 3-minute breathing meditation, which is like a neurological circuit breaker. It just calms you down and resets you for the day. And there's lots of little techniques, but there's also research on how you schedule. So people have always said, I'm a night person, I'm a morning person, I'm a this person, that's when I'm most productive. Well, not to be too direct, but if you think that, you're probably wrong. Because you don't live in a world where those time differences make sense, because we are on 24/7. So what the science shows is the first 55 minutes of effort is your most productive in the day, because that's the time when you've been least bombarded by text messages and Zooms and all the stuff coming at us, right? So the idea is that, very importantly, you don't sleep with your iPhone in the bedroom. And I know people are saying, but that's my alarm. Well, there's this company I'm sure people are familiar with. You can go online, you can order a alarm clock for like $3.99, and it's delivered to you the next day. Get the phone out of the bedroom. Even when you're asleep, your mind won't rest because it knows the phone is there and it's waiting to respond to it. And then when you get up, don't reach for your phone, because every time you multitask, you lose 3.5% of your productivity for the day. So many people who grab that phone before their feet hit the cold floor have already gone through 17 text messages, at which point they're at 40% of productivity for the day. And they haven't done it.
But Leo, does that mean you can get to negative productivity?
No, we don't know why,
With
but
that math?
It stops at 40%. We don't know why, but thank goodness it does, because you'd be sitting in bed for it. But yeah, and it's, you can reset it and all that kind of stuff, but why go through that? So keep the phone outside the bedroom, get up, do whatever you do in the morning, and then first 55 minutes, do the most important thing. Don't clear your emails out, your texts, all that stuff. And very quickly, I have a really good friend who's a partner in a major law firm, and I was talking to him about this, and he said, Leo, you don't understand. I run a global practice. I get messages all night long, and my clients from around the globe expect me to answer them as soon as I wake up. I said, really? I said, what time do you wake up? He said, I wake up at 5 a.m. every morning. I said, really? That's interesting. Did you tell your clients you wake up at 5 a.m.? And he just looked at me, and I said, so you didn't tell them it was 5 a.m., so how do they know you don't get up at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m.? So my point is, you don't have to literally respond to people's requests as soon as you wake up. You can, get into the day, practice some meditation, get prepared, get 55 minutes of high-level production under your belt, and then respond to all these folks. But there's lots of tips like that. Pragmatic optimism is a very important one, and that is the belief that things will get better. And so, in this world, and even in any world we've ever lived in, when something bad and shocking happens to you, it's like three waves crash upon you. And one wave feels like this is never going to end. And the other wave is I'm going to lose everything. And the last wave is I don't know what to do about this. If you simply practice answering three questions, anytime you're even mildly disappointed or there's a setback, you will wire your brain not to experience those tidal waves. And the questions are, will this last forever? And the answer is no. There's not a reliable authority in the world that doesn't agree we will defeat COVID at some point. It's not going to be a smooth journey. While we're doing okay in the US, we know that South America is in a devastating place. India is hopefully starting to come out of that. We've got the Delta virus. It's going to be challenging, but we will end it. And the working economy, I don't mean the markets. The markets are doing unbelievably well from a psychologist standpoint. But, the working economy, people going back to jobs, people who lost family businesses. I know restaurants that were lost after 100 years. Those families will find a way to maybe not open a restaurant, but find another way forward. So the second question is, have I lost everything? Well, the answer is we've lost a tremendous amount. Devastating. But we have also often learned important things, like what's really valuable in my life. And for me personally, that means I spend more time with the people in my family that I love and care for. And I will tell you, when my four daughters were newborn and, for a few years after that, I traveled constantly. And I now have been blessed with the third grandchild. And in the second 6 months of her life, she lived with us. And I made sure that every day I didn't lose the blessing of just spending an hour and a half with her. Even though I, regret not having done with my own kids for all the right reasons, right? You're out making a living, you're supporting them, blah, blah, blah. But so there have been a lot of positive things that we just have to kind of take inventory of. And the final question is, how can I make things just a little bit better today? And, some people have opportunities that end up, they've got the significant opportunity to make a difference. But all of us have some opportunities. I'm like everybody else. I'm not always kind and nice, but lately, I make it my business, when I'm checking out of the hardware store, I just go the extra mile to smile and say thank you because, you've been making it happen for us. And just, when I get my morning coffee, the same thing. Just thank the woman behind the plexiglass for being there. Those small things make a big difference in our world.
So, and Leo, let me just jump in there about that. And I think we were really good at doing that, but I'm not sure that we've sustained it, if that makes sense. So I think, when the vaccine was just available or before the vaccine was available, I remember just there was an awful lot of appreciation and thanks for those essential workers. But, once the vaccine became available and people started, quote unquote, going back to more normal lives, I haven't seen as much appreciation. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. So what people don't realize is now that things are better, right? I think I read that there was only 300 deaths in the U.S. yesterday, which is an awful number, but it's down from 3,000. So there's been huge progress. The problem is that means the anxiety is going to go up, not down, because it's the old Maslow's hierarchy. For the last 18 months, we've literally been worried about survival. Will I live through this? People were dying all around us. People were being hospitalized. We all know what that was. So there was no time to really understand what you were feeling. And now you've got this renewed freedom from the vaccine, and some people not vaccinated just thinking it's all over. And so that has caused a really terrible rise in violence. And unfortunately, we're going to see that for a while longer. And we're also going to see workplace anger for a while longer because people are just, as you said, 4 out of 10 of us have anxiety and or depression. Burnout In our work, we haven't seen burnout below 75% in any organization in over a year. So, this with this freedom comes this release and this, kind of get out of my way. I want my stuff back. And it's kind of, as a psychologist, understandable. But we need to really understand this and do something about it, because we are squandering a huge opportunity to look, going through the pandemic is never going to be worth it. But we have the opportunity to rebuild our entire societies around the world. It's like a global reset button. So that's another reason why I wrote the book and why I feel strongly about resilience, because it gives us the ability to be a little bit calmer and more empathetic as we go forward.
So I actually think that that's a great segue into the third set of behaviors, which is around empathy. And those are the first three that you suggest that people focus on in the book. Do you want to say anything else about empathy?
Sure. So empathy is not sympathy, just so we all get clear of that. Feeling bad for somebody is not empathy, and it's not helpful. Empathy is really understand what the world is like for somebody else, from their point of view and their reality. So, we've got a lot of business leaders making tough decisions about how to go forward into the workplace. And, these are hard decisions, right? But my concern is I happen to have the privilege of coaching a number of single moms who've been working at home who have children. Now, I'm a dad of 4, grandpa of 3. I have no idea, none, zero, what it's like to be a single mom with kids, right? So the idea of people like me, for those of you who can't see in the podcast, I'm a white male of a certain age. For people like me to make decisions about people whose situation we don't understand, it's just silly. So empathy is about, calling up these folks and saying, don't ask how are you. That's kind of insulting. How am I? Do you read the papers? So the question is, what's on your plate? And what that causes, many of us feel understandable. Like we've got this dark, heavy cloud hanging over us. And when I say, what's on your plate, you start to segment that. Oh, what's on my plate? Oh, my mom's in assisted living. My mother-in-law's in hospice. Work is deadline after deadline. My wife and I haven't had a quiet cup of coffee in weeks. You start to pull it apart. And therefore, it's less overwhelming. So already you're helping the person, but you are also understanding all the different challenges they're faced with, right? Which are going to be different from yours. The second question is, how do you feel about all that? You just let people express, how they feel, what the emotions are. So you not only know what they're dealing with, but how it's affecting them. And then the third question is, which one of those things right now bothers you the most, causes you the most pain? Well, out of all that stuff, it's this one. Okay, and what have you thought about doing to address that one? Now, either the person's going to say, well, I've thought about whatever the idea is, and then you can be supportive and say, how can I help you with that? Or the person's going to say, I have no idea. At which point you say, hey, let's talk about that, right? And after that conversation, you've been incredibly helpful to the person, and you really understand some of what it's like to be in their world. So that's, and that's what we should all be doing with each other. So we really understand, there's so much divisiveness and so much bitterness in the world around so many issues. If we just had that conversation, it would go a long way. The other thing about empathy is there's also self-empathy, right? So there's an old Buddhist tradition, about 5,000 years old, that 5,000 years later, neuroscience has found actually works. I think the Buddhists were way ahead of us. And it's simply thinking to yourself, may I be safe? May I be healthy? May I be happy? May I live with ease? May I live with purpose? And that just gets your brain to understand, hey, this person that I am is deserving of those things. It's okay to want those things. It's okay to work 2 hours less in a 12-hour day to have some of those things. And then when you're getting ready for a meeting with somebody who kind of gets on your nerves, think those things towards them right before the meeting. May Leo be safe. May Leo be healthy. May Leo be happy. May Leo live with ease. May Leo live with purpose. Your brain can't wish those things towards somebody and be angry and annoyed with them at the same time. So you enter the interaction with a sense of understanding and peace. So that's the core of empathy.
That's pretty amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And Leo, do you have one final piece of advice that you'd give our listeners on how to reduce anxiety and increase their emotional health in the midst of this still challenging time?
Okay, I'm going to cheat and give you two pieces. The first one is, remember, it's natural. You're not broken because you're anxious or depressed. Or this happened to you because your brain was doing its job in a very, very abnormal environment. And the second thing is, build your resilience. Follow the behaviors and you will learn how to thrive.
Well, thank you so much, Leo. So
Thank
many
you,
insights. And
always fun to be with you.
Well, and we so appreciate you being part of our thought leadership here at the Conference Board. For our listeners, thank you for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. Have a better idea on how you can thrive amidst adversity. If you'd like to find out more about our research and or other interactive programs, please visit our website at tcb.org/podcasts or webcasts. And you can also find our podcasts on other platforms like iTunes or Spotify. Thanks again, and goodbye.
This has been Off the Shelf, a podcast by the Conference Board.